Greetings, Earthlings. I'm back again from my suburban, or dare I say, suburban cabin in the woods. And I'm going to be bringing you another video from the archives today because I think it'll boost morale among me and my artist friends. And the sense that I have is that they probably need it, because I definitely do. As some of you may know, I'm working on some music at the moment, and it turns out the kind of music that I'm trying to write is not so easy to write, because I have to be doing vocals, guitar, bass, and production, and a little bit of keyboards as well, and kind of drums too. But I have a drummer on board who's also a fantastic musician in his own right, but we don't get to see each other that much. So it's fair to say that I'm a little bit run ragged and a little bit maybe even depressed, because there's just so much goes into just doing what seems like the smallest, most innocuous idea. And that is part of why people, I think, eventually don't take their ideas so seriously. But that's what this video is about. It's about taking your ideas seriously. So you'll be watching this at the same time that I'm probably rewatching it, because I actually do sometimes watch my own videos to get a pep talk or to try and regain perspectives from the past, which were once very clear and useful but have become since ephemeral. So here we go. Let's roll the clip. It's Take Your Ideas Seriously. Hey guys, I'm back again. And as always with the wee baby Chimbles. You can only see his little rump sticking out because of the camera. Oh, hello there. But he's here too. Hopefully also look at him peering at me. Oh, I know you're a good dog. So this one's going to be called something like Take Your Ideas Seriously. And when I say seriously, I don't mean that you should not have a sense of humor about it. This is an interesting kind of paradox, I think, in the culture in general, that when we think about taking things seriously, you know, the humor kind of leaves the room. But we need a little bit of humor and a little bit of kind of a flippant, playful relationship with a lot of the most important ideas, so that we can examine them closely without being consumed by them, right? So the merit of a sense of humor is probably a topic to go more in depth on another time, but you know, nonetheless, you should take your ideas seriously. So what do I mean by that? I think there's a tendency for each of us, especially as we get older, to start getting the impression that we're running out of ideas, or that we just aren't creative people, right? I've heard people say things like, I don't have a creative bone in my body. And, you know, they sure as hell act like it. And they really mean it. But of course, when you see children at play, children just being children, they almost invariably are creative, and they're habitually creative. They just kind of do interesting, spontaneous things all the time, even if it's just a weird dance. They do a silly dance, or they do it, you know, they have a really unique kind of facial expression, or they go, you know, they decide that some doll's name is Billy or Judy or something. They're just constantly in this spontaneous act of creativity that is their life, right? And there's a joy in that. So again, this is relating back to joy and responsibility. But I think adults tend to have a bit more of an apprehensive relationship with engaging with their own creativity, right? Because we all have some kind of internal creative process that happens. It's not a monologue or a dialogue for everyone. That's an interesting point. You can research that for yourself, but especially if you have a voice in your head, like if you hear your thoughts semantically, like you can kind of string sentences together in your head. Not everyone can do that. Not everyone actually thinks in that way. And that's something you might, if you've always just grown up thinking in sentences, you might assume that everyone thinks in sentences, but they actually really don't. And this is something that's, some people think visually, and some people think neither semantically nor visually, which is even harder to get your head around. Okay, so when you have thoughts, whether they're creative, whether they're semantic, visual, whatever, there's a tendency as an adult to kind of make a decision in that moment whether you're going to engage with that thought any further or not. And there's normally a pragmatic component to that. So for example, if you're driving to a meeting at work and you have an idea for a children's illustrated novel, you're probably going to go, why am I thinking about that right now? I should be thinking about things for this work meeting. So I'm going to fuck that off. I'm going to kind of give myself a mental talking to for thinking about, goobelglorp, the glorpian, instead of thinking about, policy analysis for the consultancy firm I work for or whatever. But goobelglorp, the glorpian, is not that's not an idea that's innately without value. You're just situationally ascribing it a lesser value than ideas that you could theoretically be having about the situation which it is at hand, right? The reality is that if you're driving to a meeting on policy analysis, you're kind of probably as ready as you're ever going to be, right? You've either prepared, in which case you can use what you've prepared, or you're going to have to wing it. And if you wing it, then maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But this trend that we fall into of saying, no, goobelglorp is bullshit. I think it was called goobelglorp. I'm not interested in those kind of ideas anymore. When you say that to your brain, when you say that to your creativity, you can see that in a way you're saying that to your inner child, right? And again, inner child is like an evocative, I know that can mean a lot of things. But just, proverbially speaking, like there is this creative force in you that is most expressed in childhood, and it's still there. It's not gone. But every time you say, that's nonsense, or that's not interesting enough, or that's not relevant enough to my life, or that's not me enough, right? That's another one where you go, goobelglorp doesn't work into my self-image of being, a policy analyst. And so he's got to go. Well, all of these things in the long term are stifling your creative impulse, because your creative impulse doesn't discriminate between goobelglorp and ideas about policy analysis. It just does whatever it's going to do, right? And it's always been that way. And again, you can funnel it, like you can say, I only want to have ideas about policy analysis. But that doesn't mean that that now suddenly all of your creative output is going to just be funneled straight into policy analysis. Instead, what's going to happen is that you are basically excising a portion of your creativity and driving it underground effectively. You're saying, I don't want to see you, I don't want to hear you, unless you come to talk to me about policy analysis. And, you know, frankly, I think that's a damn shame. And there are actually like serious consequences for this, potentially, right? Because a lot of people harbor a desire to be creative, even if they profess to not have a creative bone in their body. They probably have this thought like, I'd love to learn a musical instrument, or I'd love to write a book, or I'd love to dance like I danced when I was young, or something like that. And, you know, when they don't do those things, or they don't seem to see a path forward to like how to do those things, then there comes this kind of self-loathing, this idea that somehow there's something fundamentally wrong with you. But what if I suggested that it's not something that's fundamentally wrong with you, it's something fundamentally wrong with your behavior, which is that you're gatekeeping ideas. And when you put it that way, it's not that hard to see. That's not a radically difficult thing to fix, right? I'm not saying it's necessarily easy, but it starts with not being judgmental about whether an idea is good or not. Because firstly, you can't know if an idea is good or not in advance. Schopenhauer has a great thing about this, which I'll talk about another time, but in a sense, you have to let the idea run its course before you know what the quality of it is. And letting it run its course is not something that you can do if you judge it in its seed form, right? Like goobelglorp. I hope it's goobelglorp. I just keep saying random words at this point. But, you know, in my head, he's like a little green dude. He's got 3 little like antenna coming out of his head, and he's on sort of like a moon-like planet. And he goes on all kinds of adventures. So I could just be like, all right, well, that's dumb. That's for dummies. I'm a grown-up. You know, who's interested in goobelglorp on the moon or wherever he is? But this goes back to something I talked about before, is that when someone writes a book, when someone writes an album, they don't know everything about what's going to be in it. They don't know whether it's going to be good or bad. So I don't know if goobelglorp is going to be, you know, the next big thing, or like something that's really valuable to people. Probably more valuable than like yet another 40-page policy analysis report that no one's going to read, frankly. Like about the same amount of people are going to read policy analysis as goobelglorp, hypothetically, which is kind of 0 either way, or like 1 to 2 people. So what does it look like to take an idea seriously. Because if you're on the way to a meeting, you can't write a whole illustrated novel, right? It's not going to happen. But you can, instead of hating, go, oh, there's an idea. There's something in this. And the fact that I've had this creative impulse tells me that I'm uniquely in a position to make something of this. And so I'm going to take the time to at least write down what it is that I'm thinking about in this moment. Because again, this is part of the reason I make these videos. There's a chance that you're never going to be thinking as clearly about this thing as you are in the moment that you're thinking about it. In fact, you probably won't, right? You'll probably move on with your life. And, you know, we can see that, like, if J.R.R. Tolkien had just moved on with his life instead of when he had this little idea, oh, it's just this hobbit and he's got this ring, you know, that could easily have happened. Or J.K. Rowling just going, oh yeah, a kid with a lightning bolt on his forehead. Well, that sure is dumb. And then she just kind of moved on with her life, you know? Well, that would have been a tragedy. We know now that that would have been a shame, or at least if you're a fan of Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, you would agree that it would have been a darn shame. And they certainly would not have been as successful as they have been. And I think Tolkien is a good example of this because if I'm not mistaken, he was a literature professor. It's either literature or linguistics, I can't remember. So like, yeah, he was a writer, but he wasn't like trying to be the next great fantasy writer or novelist. Like that's just what he was, it's just what happened. He got taken by the idea and he went ham on it. He's like, this is important. I don't know why it's important, but that doesn't matter. You know, he was staying up till 1 a.m. just like writing this thing that he thought was, that there was something to it. And, you know, we don't know where those ideas come from. Like, no one knows where exactly ideas come from. I believe in the ingenuity of science that maybe one day we'll be able to figure out where ideas come from, maybe. But as of, you know, today, which is June something, 2024, you know, I don't think you should believe any scientist or philosopher or theologian who tells you that you know that they know exactly where ideas come from. People have had all kinds of theories, from the daemons and geniuses of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, respectively, to you know, that ideas come from gods, devils, or the ether, you know, some kind of chaotic collective unconscious type thing like Carl Jung, or, you know, maybe you just think you have the ideas, in which case, look, fair enough. But you got to admit, you don't have them in a conventional sense of like, you don't draft them up consciously. They come to you somehow. And when they come to you, you must welcome them in, at least insofar as you hear them out and take note of them and say, okay, this is not merely an instance of random whateverness, right? You can think of the universe as being purely chaotic, but if you think of your mind as being purely chaotic, and therefore that like no thought is more useful than any other thought, I think that leads to nihilism unless you cultivate that in a very refined and frankly like lucky kind of way. Like you would have to have good luck to really like take that approach, take the approach that like Buddhism, etc. goes with, of kind of no thought is more important, more or less important than any other thought. I personally, even if it is a goobelglorp or whatever, I can feel intuitively when something creative is happening in my mind. And so then to add a value judgment to that is unnecessary. I think you can just follow that. You just go, yep, okay, goobelglorp. You write it down. You know, okay, you've got your meeting in 10 minutes. This will take you 1 minute. Even if it's like a voice memo, I'm a huge proponent of that. Like having they call it like voice memo on iOS. I have Android, so I'll use Easy Voice Recorder. Just record it. You know, stardate 23. goobelglorp is, you know, walking on the moon. And I've seen people take all kinds of approaches to this, but they all have the same thing. Like here's like two sides of the coin. So John Mayer, who's a guitar player, if you don't know, he was on this podcast with this guy called Rick Rubin, and he said he knows when he's got an idea, right? It just comes. Everyone, really, that's how we all have to explain it. It just comes from somewhere, and he goes ham with it. What he does is, if he has gotten an idea, if he's got dinner reservations later that night, he cancels. Seriously, he will just cancel. You know, I don't know if he's married, kids, whatever, but he's that serious about it, where he just goes, yeah, I wouldn't rather do anything else than write my next single right now. Like, I'm a guitar player and songwriter first and foremost. And frankly, going to the Indian restaurant at 6:30 doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. So, and again, like, that's just his thing, right? And that's hardcore. I know that's hardcore. A lot of people will hear that and they're like, that kind of sounds like a dick. And he kind of is a dick. But I love him. John Mayer, if you're watching this, it's okay, dude. I'm also a bit of a dick. But, you know, I respect the fact that he takes the ideas that seriously. And the ideas respect that he takes his ideas that seriously, right? Quincy Jones has this old line. It's in his Netflix documentary that his daughter made about him, like about his life. And he has this line in it where he says, yeah, I'm paraphrasing a bit, but he says, yeah, I'm always quick to write down ideas because I know that otherwise they'll go down the road to Mancini, who Henry Mancini was a contemporary of Quincy Jones, another extremely talented composer. And so, you know, he was genuinely afraid is maybe a stretch, but he kind of had this relationship with his muse, that's another concept, that, you know, it wasn't just that he could just mess around and then do it tomorrow, you know. He was aware that there were many other brilliant minds, and that if an idea was kind of itching to make itself known to the world, then it was going to go elsewhere. So, you know, back to John Mayer, like, this guy doesn't mess around. He just goes, nah, like, I have to write this song now. And again, there's a weight to that. We know that there's a weight to that. Again, that's like part of the loss of childhood innocence into adulthood thing, is like, we know that we have a limited amount of time on this earth. We have a limited amount of emotional, mental, physical resources with which to do what we need to do. And so that's part of where this impulse comes to kind of pick and choose what we're going to follow through with mentally. But John Mayer is just like, no, this is the thing. So I'm going to spend, I'm not going to sleep. I don't really care what it takes. I'm just going to spend 16 hours figuring this out. And, this is a cliche, but, you never have time. Like, you make the time. We make the time. And if you make the time, you can make the time for a lot of different things. Okay, so again, this is not an indictment against anyone who can't find time for things, but there are people like Albert Schweitzer, for example. Like, look into that guy, like the amount of things that he was incredible at, right? He was like a humanitarian. He wrote this still to this day, hugely respected biography on J.S. Bach. He was a professor. He was a university professor. He was a humanitarian. He was an organist, like a world-class organ player. He was just like, and it just went on and on. I think he was a doctor as well. I mean, it's just crazy, like, that guy, and you could just tell all that mattered, and it wasn't like he only had time to do one thing. It's not like he had to, I can only be a doctor or an organist, He did it all. So yeah, John Mayer's one. That's one level, right? And I know that's way beyond where most of us are ready to commit to an idea. But another style would be Steve Vai, who's also a guitarist. You can see my wall's full of guitars, so I just using what I know here. Write what you know, that's what they say, right? So Steve Vai, incredible guitar player in his own right. And he has a different approach, which is when he has an idea, maybe he does something with it in the moment, but he respects it enough to record it. And he doesn't force himself to, I heard this on a Devin Townsend podcast, by the way, if you want to see Steve Vai talking about this. And so he will record it. He'll give a broad overview of what its features are. Like, for example, I don't know for sure, but he might say, what tuning his guitar is in, what key the piece of music is in, whether he feels like it's something that might be an orchestral idea or something that might be more at home in like a funk rock track. So he just throws some kind of metadata in there, like in the name of it, and he files it away somewhere. He just goes, all right. And then, if he's ever feeling hard up for ideas, or I think he does it like annually or something from memory as a ritual, where he just goes through and he just says, that's a good one. I'm glad I recorded that. And again, that's what I do with my musical ideas as well. And that's very humbling, right? Because a lot of the time they're just these tiny little fragments, just this kind of like da-da-da. and I'll go da-da-da, yeah, all right. And then I'll sing it into my phone, often very haphazardly, and then I'll come back to it later and I'll go, what were you singing? What were you doing, right? And the irony is, the more elaborate it is, the sillier it sounds when I try to sing it into my phone, right? Because It gets harder and harder to sing, and I'm starting to like, I'm like amateur beatboxing under the notes so that I can get an idea of where the beat is happening and everything. And, you know, someone who doesn't have my insight into my own musical taste and musical mind might listen to that and just go, this just sounds like a collection of recordings of a crazy person. But when I hear it, when I'm listening back, I lean in, you know, if I can't quite get it, I sit there and I listen to it and I'm like, I see what you were trying to do there. And, you know, am I going to use all of them? No. Okay. So again, that's the counterbalance. All right. I'm a moderate. I'm not trying to promote some radical view here. Like, there are some ideas where, on balance, there's not a lot really more you can do with them. But you took them in, right? You said, yes, come in. I'm going to take you as seriously as any other idea, you know, and it doesn't matter if you're a little wonky and a little weird, because a lot of really good ideas are a little wonky and a lot weird. Little wonky and a lot weird, or a lot wonky and a little weird. And so, is that it? I think that's it. I think I said everything I needed to say. Thanks again if you've listened up to this point. And yeah, really take the ideas that come to you and welcome them in as a good host. And, you know, don't be afraid of them. Don't come to believe that they're a waste of your time, because they don't come to you for no reason. Again, I just think you have to, at a certain point, you have to just accept that. It's not scientific. I know it's not like something that we can demonstrate empirically, but we can't really empirically demonstrate the reason for almost any mental activity at this point. Like, it's still kind of just within the realm of metaphysics, honestly. So just say, okay, it is happening. I have the ability to make the most of it, take notes, have a little place, you know. I use Google Keep. I use my easy voice recorder. Just have a little trove. It's cool. It's fun. You know. You have a little stash of stuff that have a YouTube channel like this, right? Just a little stash of stuff, and it's like, you know, if you do die, which we all will eventually, you know, we're all that headed that way, then maybe you'll leave something behind and that'll be of value to people, and that will make people realize that you were and are more than a policy analyst and like a victim of your circumstances to, you know, X or Y degree. Like, you're a human being, right? I'll leave you with a quote. Hopefully I can find it, because I didn't actually necessarily think that I was going to use this quote. Be more or less than you are as a human being. And I love that. I think that's spot on. I think that's the true value. It's not about getting paid, and it's not about getting laid. It's about experiencing the richness of what it is to be a human being and showcasing that, right? Let the world see in you a reflection of the richness of their own humanity. Okie doke. Well, I send you guys my love, and so does Chimbles in his own way. All right, farewell.